Hi, Zach. Welcome to lesson number 86. And today's lesson, if you're going to follow along, starts on page 357 of your book. Can you believe we're on page 357? We're almost done with this book. It's awesome. Okay, so today we're going to talk about division of polynomials. So as you know, we have been multiplying polynomials. So that's when you do like x squared plus 3 and you multiply it by, blah, blah, blah. You know how to do that because we've been doing it up until now. So you knew this was coming because this is the inverse operation, right? Now we're going to be dividing polynomials. And guess what? I am not going to lie to you. This is hard. You are going to have to pay a lot of attention because for me, it's taking a ton of mental effort right now to get through this lesson. I mean, this is hard for me. So let's just do it together and we will get through it, okay? I used to hate facial hair, but then it grew on me. Okay. Alrighty, let's get going. Dividing polynomials. I know that it's scary, but we can do this. I'm going to show you how you're going to think it's simple. You're probably going to be able to do it in your head. But for me, it takes a lot of mental energy just to make sure that I get everything correctly, because you're definitely going to have to use neat handwriting, and keep your rows and columns nice and straight. That is the key to getting these questions right. Otherwise, you'll make a mistake, okay? So this lesson is funny because it just jumps right into an example. And the first example is 86.1. It's on the bottom of page 357. And it's basically, they're like, okay, let's start out with an easy one. So we're going to take this polynomial, okay, and this is going to be a trinomial, and we're going to divide it by x. So we're just dividing by a monomial, and that's going to make it easier to do this whole problem, right? Okay, so this is going to be easy peasy. You're going to love this. Check it out. You basically just take this, okay, and you write it kind of like a fraction, because a fraction is, dividing by x, right? So it's the whole thing. Here, let me not do it like that. Okay, so what you're going to do is you have to think about it as dividing each term by x. So I'll just write it that way. So 3x cubed divided by x, 7x squared divided by x. That last one, x over x. So every term in the polynomial is going to be divided by the x or whatever they want you to divide it by, okay? So in this example, it's x. So that's all I did. I made it just one big fraction. And then what you do, it's super easy. You just basically simplify this, okay? So I'm going to use a different color just to make it a little bit more obvious. So you've got an x to the 1 basically down here, and then an x cubed on top. So one of those x's cancels out. So that cancels out and makes this a 2. Okay, this cancels out and makes that just a 1. And then this just simplifies to minus 1 because it's a fraction. X over x is the same as 1. So what do we have left? We have this 3x squared, so I'll write that here, 3x squared plus 7x minus 1. Okay, so that's all you do when you're dividing a polynomial by a monomial. So easy peasy, that's not too bad. But that was an easy one. So let's make it a little harder. Don't be afraid. I feel it too. I didn't say it like him at all, did I? Oh, well. Okay, so we're going to do example 86.2. This is also dividing a polynomial, this whole thing, by a monomial, but this time the monomial is not just x, it's a little bit more complicated. It's 4x to the 4th, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing. Every term has to be divided by that. So I'm going to do 12. Well, let me get a color that you can actually see. All right, let's do this. And maybe not so fat. How about that? Okay, yeah, now I've got it. All right, so let's do 12x to the 12. Now that has to be divided by 4x to the 4th. And let's do the next term, 8x to the 8th. That also has to be divided by 4x to the 4th. Let's do the next term, 4x to the 6, and that also has to be divided by 4x4. You got it. All right, now, same as before. All you do is you simplify each term. Okay, so let's take a look at this first term. 12 can be divided by 4. I mean, that's easy peasy. I'm going to end up with a 3 on top. So that cancels, and that's a 3. Okay, now what about the x's? X to the 4th, that cancels out a bunch of those x's, right? So we're going to end up with 3x to the 8, because when you divide x to the 12 over x to the 4th, you're basically canceling out 4 of those, so you're left with 12 minus 4, which is 8. Okay, so that's the first term. Now let's simplify this second term. So I'm going to put a minus down here. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. So I'm just going to put a 2 because that cancels. And then x to the 4th cancels out 4 of those. So it's going to be x to the 4, right? And now let's do this last term. Okay, so this will be 4 cancels the 4. That's just going to end up being a 1. This x to the 4th cancels out 4 of those, so it's going to be x squared. So I have a plus x squared at the end. All right, you probably did that whole thing in your head. That is the final answer. All right, now the next step, what if we are dividing a polynomial by a binomial? So instead of x, or instead of 4x squared, it's going to be something like x squared minus 3 or x plus 1, and that's the thing that you're dividing. So that is a little scarier for sure. Not quite as scary as a clown in the backseat of your car, because that would probably be horrible. So what they do first is show you something easy peasy that you know. You know how to do regular division already. But let's review it, and we're going to pay a lot of attention to the steps, because the steps are going to be exactly the same when you're when you're dividing a polynomial here by a binomial here. Okay? And a couple terms to remember. This is called the dividend. I wrote that in your book. I loved writing in books. It's awesome. And this is called a divisor. So that'll help you as you're reading through the text. It'll say, take the divisor, take the first term of the divisor, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's what those are. And of course, you know the answer of a division problem is called a quotient, right? Okay. All right, so what do we do if we have just 49 divided by 12? How do we do that? They wrote this a little funny. It's not just the regular division sign. They put this extra line there. I don't know why, but I don't know. Maybe it'll make sense as we proceed. But what do you do? How many times does 12 go into 49? All right, so I know it goes into it 4 times. Okay, so now what is the next step? Because when you're doing this with a complicated thing here, the next step is you multiply that by this. So you multiply that and you write the answer underneath in this space, okay? So 4 times 12 is going to be 48. And then what we do when we divide, and you don't even think about this anymore because it's so automatic to you, but I want you to actually think about it. You change this sign. Then you subtract. 49 minus 48 is 1. And then if there's anything else up here, like if it wasn't 49, but if it was 490, then what would you do next? You would bring that down. Okay, but of course there's nothing left there, so now we're going to have a remainder. So we have a remainder of 1. So what do you do with a remainder? You put it over this guy. So the answer is going to be 4 and 1 over 12. Okay, so those are the steps. Just remember that as we go through this, okay, because it's going to get a little more challenging here. This is example 86.3. They want us to divide this big long thing by -3 minus x. So how would we go about setting that up? I'm going to just grab all of this, put it down here, okay? This is my dividend. Okay, then I'm going to make my division sign. And then I'm going to grab this guy. This is my divisor. And I'm going to put it there. Now, the first step to the problem is to make sure that everything is written in descending order. And it's not right now. It is not. So I'm going to rewrite the problem. So this should be in descending order. What I mean by that is descending order as far as the exponents, right? The degree, it should be in descending degree. So the first thing is going to be 3x cubed, okay, minus 2x squared plus 5x plus 50. This is important. If you don't do it, you won't get the problem right, okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing. This divisor also has to be written in descending order of the degree of the terms. So it's instead of negative 3 plus x, I'm going to write x minus 3. Okay, so that makes sense so far. That is step 1. All right, the next step. So the next step, I'm just going to erase this up here so I have lots of room and it doesn't confuse us. The next step is we're going to figure out what goes here. And to do that, you take mentally, you're going to take this first term of the divisor and think, how many times does it go into this? Or what do I need to multiply this by in order to get this? I need to multiply this by something in order to get this. That's the number that's going to go up here. Okay, so to determine the first term of the quotient, divide the first term of the divisor into the first term of the dividend and write that down. So let's see, it's going to be 3x squared. And the reason it's 3x squared is because if I multiply this by this, I'm going to get 3x cubed. Okay, so that's step 1. Now, the next step, remember, think back to that multiplication problem. The next step is going to be to multiply this times this and write the answer underneath. So now, if we take this 3x squared and multiply it by this, we have to multiply it by every term. So first, let's do 3x squared times x. 3x squared times x is going to be 3x cubed. And now we have to do 3x squared times this negative 3, and we're going to get negative 9x squared. Do you see how I got that? I did this times this and put it there. Okay. Now, I want you to think back to the multiplication, the easy division problem that we did. The next step was actually to change the signs of these. So this becomes negative, this becomes positive. And we changed the sign so that we could subtract, but you're basically just adding a negative. So now we're going to add this plus this and write the answer underneath. So of course, this part, 3x squared minus 3x squared, you don't have a remainder there, so it's nothing. And then 9x squared minus 2x squared is going to be 7x squared. Or you could think of it as negative 2x squared plus 9x squared is 7x squared. That is a little confusing that we're adding this instead of subtracting it, but we are basically subtracting it because we changed the sign. But then once you change the sign, you add these two things together. Okay? Then you get this. What's the next step? Remember, if this was a long thing, you bring it on down. Bring the next term down. So we're going to have 7x squared plus 5x. And I'm just bringing this down. Okay? Now we repeat the process. So how many times does this go into this? Well, don't think of that into that. Just think of this first term into this first term. So what do I need to multiply this by in order to get this? That's what I'm going to write up here. So then I write plus 7x. Because if I multiply this by this, I'm going to get this, right? Okay, cool. So now I repeat the process. I'm going to multiply this by this whole thing and write it underneath. So 7x times x is going to be 7x squared. Now do the second one. 7x times a negative 3 is going to be minus 21x. Okay, write your line underneath because then you're going to basically subtract, but it's really changing the sign, change both those signs, and then add. Okay, so let's add it. So when you add this and this, you get nothing. It just cancels out, right? But when you add these, what do you get? You get 26x. Because we're adding 5x plus 21x. We get 26x. Next step, bring it on down. What's the next contestant on The Price is Right? It's plus a 50. Okay, now we repeat the process. We're going to see how many times does this go into this whole thing. But that's too hard to do mentally. So how many times does this go into this? Or what do I need to multiply that by to get 26x? All right, so that's easy peasy. I just need to multiply that x by 26. And now I've got this up here. What's the next step? We multiply this 26 times this whole thing. So 26 times x is going to be 26x. And then 26 times a negative 3 is going to be negative 78. Then we put our line, and then we subtract, but we're basically changing the sign and adding. This simplifies to nothing. This simplifies to 50 plus 78, and you get 128 right here. Now, what do we do with that 128? Remember, if it's a remainder, it's going to be a fraction, like 1 over 3 or whatever, 1 over whatever the divisor is. So that becomes a fraction at the end. And what we do is we add it to the end of this. So it's going to be plus 128 over x minus 3. That's basically the remainder. And you can just, instead of putting remainder, we're adding it to the quotient because that's what a remainder is. So this is the final answer. That was hard, right? That's kind of tricky. Let's do another one to make sure we've got the process down. Sorry, you got to do another one with me. Let's do example 86.4, okay? So we're going to divide this whole thing by minus 2 plus x. Of course, they didn't put it in descending order for us. But we can figure that out. That shouldn't be hard. That's just step one. So step one is we've got to put the dividend, which is this guy, in here. Okay? But we've got to put everything in descending order. So I'm going to do 2x cubed minus x squared minus x plus 4. Okay, that's the same as this guy, just in descending order. Now I'm going to put my divisor over here, but I'm going to put it in descending order. So instead of negative 2 plus x, I'm going to do x minus 2. All right, so that's the real problem. Instead of this complicated thing, it's just this. I cleaned it up a little. That looks nicer, doesn't it? All right, so let's do it. All right, so step one. How many times does this go into this? But you don't think about that. You just think, how many times does this first term go into 2x cubed? Or what do I need to multiply that x by to get 2x cubed? So I need to multiply the x by a 2 and another x and a squared. Okay, so now the next step, we're going to multiply this times this whole thing and write it under here. So it's going to be 2x cubed minus 4x squared, because that second term came from this times this. Okay, now I draw a line. Now I'm going to change basically subtract, but change the signs on both of them and add these together. This cancels out. It adds to nothing. So I've got 4x squared minus x squared. That's just going to be 3x squared. Right? Because that's a 1 there. So negative 1x squared plus 4x squared is 3x squared. Now, bring the next term on down. So now I've got 3x squared minus x. So I'm going to do it again. How many times does this go into this? Or how many times does this go into this? Or what do I need to multiply that x by to get 3x squared? So I'm going to multiply it by positive 3x. Okay, so I'm doing that in my head. Now I need to multiply this times this whole thing right under here. Okay, one term at a time. Let's do it. So I've got 3x times x, and that's going to be 3x squared. Now I've got 3x times negative 2, and that's going to be negative 6x. Now, draw my line, subtract or change the signs, and add. That cancels out. Now I've got 6x minus 1x, which is just 5x. All right, next thing, bring it on down. 5x plus 4. How many times does x minus 2 go into this? Don't think about that. Just think about the first term. How many times does x go into 5x, or what do I need to multiply it by? So obviously I need to multiply it by 5. So let's do plus 5 here. Now I need to multiply, this is getting long, huh? This 5 times x minus 2. So it's going to be 5x minus 10, right? So I'm going to do 5x minus 10, change my signs, add. So this cancels out, and I have a positive 14 at the bottom here, just a 14. And how do I deal with that remainder? I do add 14 over x minus 2 because that's my divisor. Okay, that's the answer. Woohoo! We did it! This is not so bad, right? It's not so bad. It's kind of satisfying in a weird way. All right, another example. No! Yes, we can do it. We've got it now. All right, let's divide this whole thing by minus 3 plus x. Oh, come on, at least give it to us in descending order now, right? Come on. All right, so the first step is to write the dividend. That's this guy in descending order. So I'm going to take that 3x cubed minus 2x plus 5. Perfect. And then I'm going to write this in descending order and put it here. And it's going to be x minus 3. Sweet. Now I can clean this up a little. And now we've got a problem to work with, right? So how many times does x go into 3x cubed? Or what do I need to multiply that x by to get 3x cubed? Well, I clearly need to multiply it by a 3 and an x squared. And then when I multiply this times this whole thing, I'm going to write it here. Okay, so 3x squared times x minus 3. So the first term is going to be 3x cubed minus 9x squared. Uh-oh. I see what's going to happen here. I see what's happening here. These are not like terms. So I can't just add that. So what do I need to do? I need to slide this whole thing over and just pretend that there's a like term up there. And the term I'm going to add to pretend is plus 0x squared. Okay, now, does this really change anything on the dividend? No, of course not, because this simplifies to 0. It's 0 times x squared is just 0 no matter what x is. So I can do that, and that's not cheating. That is perfectly fair, because otherwise you can't add terms because they have to be like terms in order for you to add them, okay? So now that I've got that sorted out, I just do it like every other problem, right? So I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to change my signs. I'm going to add. So this cancels out to nothing. What about this? 0x squared plus 9x squared, I mean, it doesn't change the 9x squared at all. So it's just 9x squared because it's 9x squared plus 0 basically, right? So it's just 9x squared. All right, perfect. Now I bring the next term down, 9x squared minus 2x, and do the same thing. How many times does this go into this? But I don't know that, that's too hard. But I do know how many times x goes into 9x squared because I'm going to have to multiply that by another 9x. So now this times this whole thing, I'm going to write it under here. Okay, so this is going to be 9x squared minus, let's see, I have to multiply this times this -3. Okay, so that's going to be minus 27x. Got it? You probably got that way faster than I did. Draw my line, change my signs, add. That cancels to nothing. 27 minus 2 is going to be 25x. Let's bring that next term down. Let's bring down that number 5. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right. All right, now, how many times does this guy go into this guy? Just look at the first term. X, what do I need to multiply that by to get 25x? I need to multiply it by 25. So I'm going to put a 25 up here and then multiply. This times this. That's going to be 25x, and it's going to be minus 75. Change my signs, add, I get a positive 80 for a remainder. And so then I put my 80 over here, over my divisor, and final answer. Sweet! That wasn't so bad, right? We did it. There was just that tricky step where we had to add a 0x squared right there. So just remember that you can do that. And guess what? One more. But don't worry, the end is near, my dear. All right, let's do example 86.6, and guess what? You're going to be so happy because this is the last example. All right, they want us to divide this. Okay, that doesn't look so bad. By this. All right, so first steps first. Let's put that in descending order of that dividend. Okay, so it's going to be x cubed minus 4. And then this guy, we have to put that in descending order. It's going to be x minus 3 over here. I can already see that this is going to be a problem just like the one above because there's no x squared or regular x. So what I'm going to do just up front, I'm going to move that over and I'm going to change this to plus 0x squared plus 0x and then leave that minus 4. And these don't change anything because they're just zeros. You know, if you were to simplify that whole thing, it would just turn to 0, but it makes the division easier. All right, so now I'm going to get rid of all this stuff up here, clean this up a little. Now I've got a problem to work with, right? Okay, how many times does this go into this first term? What do I need to multiply x by to get x cubed? I need to multiply it by x squared. Then we do the multiplication. This times this whole thing, write it under here. So it's going to be x cubed, because that's the first term, minus 3x squared. Draw my line, change my signs, add them together, I get 3x squared underneath. That's it. Bring down the next contestant on The Price is Right. It's going to be plus 0x. Get that out of the way. All right, now how many times does this go into this guy? How many times does x go into 3x squared? It's going to be 3x, yeah, 3x. Because then I multiply this by this. And what do I get? I get 3x squared minus 9x. Okay, draw my line, change my signs, add them together. This makes just a 9x. Bring it on down. 9x minus 4. Okay, and now how many times does this go into 9x minus 4? I need to multiply that by 9 plus a 9 up here. So then multiply. 9 times x minus 3 is going to be 9x 9x minus 27. Draw my line, change my signs. What's 27 minus 4? It's 23. And that is going to be my remainder. So I add 23 over x minus 3. That's it! We did it! We survived all of these problems. That's the final answer. Can you believe it? Can I get a hallelujah? Oh, yeah. By the way, do you know why the old lady fell down the well? She didn't see that well. I know you know that one, but it's one of my favorites. Just had to throw it in. All right, Zach, hope you do great with your homework today. I know you will. You can probably do this in your head already. So you're going to be complaining about how long this video is, but that's okay. That's why I'm here. All right, love you. Good luck. Bye.